So look, you say that it's not Muslims, but it's the doctrine of Islam. But when you talk about profiling, one of the things that people criticize you for, right? Well, then if it's not a race, then how can you profile? And I thought that was an interesting question and one that I hadn't thought of. So I know that you throw yourself into that mix as a person who looks nominally Middle Eastern, maybe kind of. It's okay, I get that part.
It's not that I look Middle Eastern, it's just that you can't obviously rule me out as someone who could not possibly be a jihadist.
Right.
Now, let me just talk about the basis for that. No, Islam is not a race, right? But
so then, how do you do profile?
Well, we've all been. So I've spent a lot of time thinking about security and violence and the logic of violence, the ethics of violence, and it's also just true that we have some very serviceable intuitions about who is likely to be an aggressor in any circumstance. You're standing on an elevator and somebody gets on, do you have to worry about this person or not? From on the topic of violence. We have good intuitions about these things, and we shouldn't, based on a politically correct desire to appear fair, deny that humans have intuitions on this. And so if I'm standing at the TSA line at the airport, and I look around, on any given day, 20%, 30%, 50% of the people there are obviously not jihadists. It's obvious enough that I'd be willing to bet my life that they're not jihadists. I can point to the woman who's 65 years old and just got back from Tucson, and she's got all her paraphernalia, all her kitsch, and she's talking to her husband, and they're in flip-flops, and I look at them, I hear their conversation, I get the whole gestalt, and somebody better trained than me could do a better job of this, right? Attention is wasted doing a pat down on these people. And now, let me just finish, because some people are going to think what I've just said is completely insane.
Right.
You have to search their bags, because anyone can put anything in a bag, right? But we have $10 worth of attention, and we can spend it any way we want. And if you spend $1 on these people, you are losing $1. I mean, it's just a bandwidth problem. We don't have an infinite amount of scrutiny, right? And so my sense is that if people are going to die at some point, I mean, if there's another airplane incident, now again, I was talking about profiling specifically in airports. If another plane gets blown up by a suicide bomber, I think political correctness will be part of the problem. We will have paid attention to people who were obviously not worthy of another moment's scrutiny. I've been in an airport where I saw a toddler from a family who everyone in this room would bet their life that this is not a family of jihadists, based on lots of micro cues, right? And based on some just statistical assumptions that were reasonable to make. And yet I see a TSA officer take this screaming little girl aside who's terrified to search her shoes. This is something that Richard Reed did to us till the end of time, right?
Yep. Just talking about on the show today how much
what I advocated in that piece on profiling is what I called anti-profiling, not profiling Muslims, not profiling Middle Eastern people, or not racial profiling, but acknowledging that we know what we're looking for. We're looking for jihadists. We're looking for people who have a certain construal of Islam and are willing to die and want to die this way. And then we have to look. The filter has to be: do these people stand a chance of being jihadists? Now, again, it's possible they could recruit Okinawan women someday, and then we have the problem of, wow, they beat our profile. They could recruit blonde octogenarians from Norway, right? But the basic fact is, we know that that's much harder to do. They're not doing it, and again, someone like me falls squarely in the profile. I don't get the short line in this situation.
I understand that. So, and a lot of people will look at that and say, okay, look, there is Sam calling a spade, and he's being reasonable, et cetera. Now, let me disagree in a number of ways. Okay, so am I in favor of profiling? Yes. Okay. But the question is how you profile, right? Do you do it what factors do you do it on? Do you do it on race? Do you do it on religion? Which is actually, again, as we talked about in the beginning here, actually impossible in the case of Islam, because there's so many different races that are in Islam that you can't even do it based on that. Or do you do it based on actions, okay? And other things that we have seen that other terrorists have done. So for example, 2 examples. One is, if someone is profusely sweating and they seem nervous, of course, check them more than the Norwegian grandmother, right? So that is a reasonable way to profile. That's exactly what you should be doing. You know why? Because I travel all the time, my family travels all the time. I don't want the plane to blow up, okay? Another thing that you could look at is, are they clean shaven? So you and I should get profiled more than people who are not clean shaven, in my opinion, okay? Because on 9/11, they made sure to shave before they went in so they wouldn't arouse suspicion. Now, that might be wrong, right or wrong as a factor, but I get that that could be a factor, right? But so if you're doing it based on specific actions, perfectly sensible. But if you do it based on religion, 1, it's not doable. 2, if you do it based on race, it gets my second objection. Even if you were right, which I do not agree to, okay, that is a good determinative factor. And I'll tell you why I don't agree with that in a second as well. It's that it has a second terrible consequence, Sam. It then says, for example, stop and frisk in New York. We are going to stop 96% blacks and Latinos. Now, could you show me some numbers that show that blacks and Latinos get arrested more often than whites in New York City? Yes, you can. Is it partly because they get stopped more? Yes, that's true too. But even if I thought they were more inclined to do the crime, which I don't believe at all, but even if I thought that, I still wouldn't stop and frisk them disproportionately. The reason is you separate the races and you make the problem worse. You make it an us versus them. And it is fundamentally unfair. And it splits us as a society, and that's not what we're about. So when you do it in this context as well, it has such damaging effects as on top of what we've discussed that I still wouldn't do.
Okay, well, what I was recommending again was what I call anti-profiling, which is just not wasting time, obviously. So what you have in the TSA, and this might be changing a little bit because now we have lines where you can be pre-screened, you know, it's this global entry where you're pre-approved. But what I was objecting to was the security theater of this obvious display of fairness, which is an obvious waste of time, right? Where we're all standing in line, taking our shoes off, watching. I mean, I've seen people forced to get out of their wheelchairs, people who could barely stand.
It depends. Let me say why it depends on a couple of reasons. One, if you're talking about a 4-year-old, we've never seen a case of terrorism for a 4-year-old, doesn't mean it can't happen. I understand what you're saying, and I think that's a fair thing to do based on the actions of 4-year-olds. They've never done a bombing before.
Well,
it would be very unlikely.
No, but what you're worried about with a 4-year-old is a family that would be willing to blow up a plane with their 4-year-old on it.
Right, but if you're talking about a wheelchair, well, I would actually check the wheelchairs more than anything else because it's filled with metal. So it depends, right? So, and in the Norwegian example you keep bringing up, okay, Norwegians don't bomb airplanes. But if you apply that across the board and said, okay, well, we can check Norwegians less in security matters, well, you would have let Breivik slide by, and he is one of the biggest mass killers we've had in recent memory, right? So it turns out anybody could be a mass killer. So it's not an efficient way of profiling. Action is much more efficient. Whereas if you were doing it on action, you'd say, this guy looks weird, his eyes are twitching, he looks crazy.
You do it on everything. You take political correctness out of the equation, right?
I'm happy to do that.
It's just based on all of the statistical knowledge you can get in any moment, based on raw intuition. I mean, you want well-trained people in the TSA. You don't want people who, currently it appears to be a job. I'm sure the churn rate there is just astronomical. I don't know how long people hold these jobs, but it's not a high status job, right? So you would want, if you really wanted a good security apparatus, you would want well-trained, well-compensated people. You'd want like the people who do it for El Al in Israel, and they make no. There are no illusions about what's going on when you go. I don't know if you've been to Israel, but you go through Ben Gurion Airport, and listen. We don't want the plane to blow up, and we're not going to be necessarily polite about this. And we're going to talk to you as long as we want to talk to you, to find out whether we need to worry about you.
The reason they're talking is because they want to see if they can see cues and clues. Yes, that I have no problem with. In fact, I've talked about how LL does it on the show before,
but LL
and it's based on action.
No, it's not just based on. I mean, that is a PC myth that is just based on action. It's based on everything. It's based on whether you've been to Pakistan. It's based on your passport, your nationality, absolutely your religion, the look in your eye, everything. It's based on whatever a well-trained person can get off of you in the split second or the hour it takes to vet you.
So, Sam, when you combine the things we've been talking about, one of the issues, and I want to move on to the other stuff which is even more dangerous, and we're at some point going to run out of patience, you and I and the audience, et cetera, is that, okay, we talk about vast numbers of Muslims, as you talk about. You say it's mainly connected to their faith, so we have to be especially careful about them, right? And then we say, well, we should, if they, based on whatever it is, race, or they've been to Pakistan or whatever it is, we should look forward to profiling them, right? When you put all these things, that's not the best way of putting it, but they get profiled more than others do, right? When we put all these things together, a lot of people then come back and go, I mean, at a bare minimum, Sam, you are giving permission for people to generalize about Muslims.
Okay, well let's
and that's dangerous. In the words of Sandra Day O'Connor, when she was talking about a different topic about the dictatorship, even in America, Sandra Day O'Connor said this. Right. She said, "Let us avoid those beginnings so we could avoid those endings." Okay, and that seems like a dangerous beginning.
It's a well, it depends on how it would be implemented, right? So it's a dangerous beginning if there's some grotesque apparatus that causes anyone who sort of looks Middle Eastern to suffer a 4-hour ordeal at the airport where white guys just breeze on through, right? It's unfair, it's inflammatory, it's not, the thing that we should want, and the thing that all Muslims, frankly, should want, is the thing that would be totally rational and would dial down the risk of this kind of terrorism on airplanes to the lowest practical level. So presumably 99.9% of Muslims getting on airplanes don't want to be blown up by a jihadist, right?
Of course.
And presumably an honest person of whatever faith will admit that the next person who blows up an airplane is more likely to be Muslim than Amish or Methodist or Mormon, and the list goes on. It's not that no one else could do it. It's not that a brevet couldn't do it.
But to your $10 example, we only have $10. If I'm checking all the Muslims, I'm wasting so much of that because we agree that 99.9% of them are not going to do it. So what we're looking for is the shifty dude who is acting like he might bomb the plane. If we spend our $10 on that guy, it's going to be much better spent.
Oh, no, of course we spend the $10. We pay attention to behavior, absolutely. So let's put behavior at the top of the list, right? Behavior is the most important thing. The guy who looks like a maniac who's about to die, right? That's whatever that looks like,
Richard
right?
Reed.
That's we want to pay attention to that guy.
Reed.
Yeah, well, Richard Reed was he looked that was a great mugshot, if nothing else. But so I'm saying all the information has to anything that is valid information.
And I'm saying the reason
use
you shouldn't put religion or race among those factors is because it leads to other dangerous things. So
a 14-year-old student in Irving, Texas, was arrested after he showed up to school and provided a clock that he created to his science teachers. The science teachers assumed that this was a bomb or could be a bomb and called authorities, and he was promptly arrested. This is Ahmed Mohamed. It's no surprise that he is a 14-year-old Muslim student who got arrested for doing absolutely nothing wrong. But apparently the clock was something that frightened science teachers who should probably know the difference between a clock and a bomb. And so they called the authorities and he was arrested. Now, the charges have since been dropped because authorities found that there was no intention of him building a bomb. What he built was not a bomb, and as a result, he was not a threat whatsoever. However, the mayor of the town of Irving, Texas, has released a statement, and she is not apologizing for what happened whatsoever. She says, "I do not fault the school or the police for looking into what they saw as a potential threat. They have procedures to run when a possible threat or criminal act is discovered. They follow these procedures in the sole interest of protecting our children and school personnel. To the best of my knowledge, they followed protocol for investigating whether this was an attempt to bring a hoax bomb to a school campus. Following this investigation, Irving PD has stated no charges will be filed against the student. I hope this incident does not serve as a deterrent against our policy and school personnel from maintaining the safety and security of our schools. She also went so far as to say, as a parent, I agree that if this happened to my child, I would be very upset.
But then my child isn't a Muslim, so she added.
It is my sincere desire that Irving ISD students are encouraged to use their creativity, develop innovations, and explore their interests in a manner that fosters higher learning. Hopefully, we can all learn from this week's events, and the student who has obvious gifts will not feel at all discouraged from pursuing his talent in electronics and engineering.
No, I mean, the fact that we made assumptions about him based on his ethnicity and his religion, I don't know why that would discourage him. I mean, I'm sure he's going to want to build something else and bring it to school because maybe he can get arrested again. I mean, nowhere in her statement did she apologize for a goddamn thing. She said our police and our school officials did the right thing. They took the right precautions. I mean, if you've got a Muslim in the building, watch out. You got to take precautions, right? And that last paragraph that Anna read you was only after significant criticism did she say she didn't apologize for any of the actions. She just said, if it was my kid, well, then of course I'd be pissed. But it wasn't my kid, was it? It wasn't a white kid at all, so I don't really care. Now, you think, wait a minute now, she's just taking precautions in this case, and I'll get to that in a second as to what they should have done. But maybe we're making assumptions about her just based on this one statement. No, no, no. She has a history.
She does.
And she's been riling up anti-Muslim fervor in that particular town. So it's not like she's not connected to this. She's part and parcel of the reason why they arrested the poor kid in the first place.
Yes, so there seems to be an issue of Islamophobia in this area of Texas. And according to Raw Story, the mayor, Beth Van Doon, pushed elected officials to back a state bill banning Sharia law after reading reports about an Islamic tribunal set up in her own town to settle personal and business disputes between Muslims based on religious principles. Now, some of you might think, oh, tribunal, that sounds kind of scary. What does that mean? Well, it turns out there's a number of different religions who have similar things set up in order to deal with certain disputes among those in the community. So, according to Tahir al-Badwawi, a tribunal judge, he explained that the Islamic court was entirely voluntary and would not oversee criminal cases, child support, custody issues, or the transfer of assets, but would instead settle divorces, workplace disputes, and small claims. It's a non-binding tribunal that acts as essentially a mediator or arbiter of minor disputes to keep them out of court. And Christians and Jews have long operated similar religious courts. But according to this mayor, it's unacceptable if it involves Muslims.
All right, so let's understand a bunch of things. First of all, I'm not in favor of any of the religious tribunals. That's because I'm not religious. I'm agnostic, and we built a whole government centered around the idea of settling disputes. I would take it to the government. I'd take it to the regular courts. But this is voluntary stuff. So if two Jewish people want to go and settle a small claim or their marital issues with a rabbi, I'm not going to get in their business. Okay, that's what they have voluntarily decided to do. If two good Christians want to do that at church with their priests, great. If two religious Muslims want to do that at a mosque, it's over a small claims thing and it doesn't bother anybody else. I don't love it, but that's their issue. That's not my issue. What am I going to get involved in their lives for? I'm going to bust into their temple, into their church, into their mosque, and be like, no, you follow my rules, right? Okay, now, if they were interfering with anything else, including state business, that would be a different matter. Very different matter, right? But they're not. They're voluntarily agreed to go in front of an arbiter, basically, right? And it happens to be a religious arbiter, but I'm not from that community, so I'm not going to judge them as long as it doesn't upset anything else in the government. But that's not the mayor's intention anyway. The mayor's intention is, like when she says Sharia law that's coming, well, she cares about the small claims, whether one guy took $50 from another guy or what happened inside somebody's marriage. She doesn't care about that. She wants to scare the living crap out of her residents and then pretend to be their defender and protector. Well, she did accomplish one of those things. She scared people enough. So when a 14-year-old kid, if you notice, wearing a NASA t-shirt, comes in with a science project, they all flip out and they go, oh my God. Now, so let's settle two important things here. America didn't used to be like this. The fearmongering has had an enormous effect. How do I know? I know because I grew up in a family that was Muslim. Now, I had renounced that. I am against religion. I'm agnostic. And yes, Turks are more secular. I was never a deeply religious person. But did everybody in my school know that I was Turkish, and did all my teachers know that? Did they know that I came from a Muslim background? Yes, they knew that. Mrs. Rosenberg would have never done this to me. Mr. Popowski wouldn't have done it. Dr. Kimmel wouldn't have done it. None of the teachers that I grew up with would have done this to me, okay? When I brought in a science project, they would have been proud of me, right? They wouldn't have done this. Look at what they did to this kid, right? And now, look, there's a huge upside to this that we're going to get to in a second, the great response back, right? But if that response had not happened, okay, that kid would have, if we hadn't gotten the spotlight on it as it happened, he would have thought, oh, no, that's it. I'm not going to do anything anymore, and I'm the enemy. They handcuffed that kid. They handcuffed him and walked him out.
So I just want to put up the picture in the first graphic. And I don't know exactly what it is, but looking at that picture of him in handcuffs and just the look on his face, it made me really emotional, right? And as someone who does news, you're not supposed to admit when you're emotional about a story. I don't care. It made me emotional because that picture represents a loss of innocence for this kid, right? I think a realization of what this country has turned into, and it's a really, really terrible thing. And hopefully the supportive response that he's gotten after this picture was taken doesn't deter him from pursuing whatever he wants to pursue, whether it's science, engineering, whatever. But you look at that picture, and he's a victim of the fear-mongering that you're talking about right now, Cenk. Like the same atheists who spend all their time debating about which religion is the worst and then coming to the conclusion that Muslims are the most violent and they should be the most feared and we should put all of our attention on them. Okay, that's the kind of fear-mongering that leads to an innocent 14-year-old being arrested for doing a science project.
Now, Anna, not all Muslims, they sound like Donald Trump, right? It's just some Muslims, so watch out for the Muslims. Don't watch out for other people. Watch out for the Muslims. I didn't say all Muslims. Oh, you interpreted it as a 14-year-old kid with a NASA t-shirt on. Oh, I could have never seen that coming.
Unfortunately, this very public and, I think, calculated distortion of my views about profiling has coincided with a 14-year-old boy's arrest in his school in Texas, this boy Ahmed, who brought what he described as a clock to school. And he is a Muslim boy who is very interested in engineering, it seems, and is a tinkerer and inventor. And he brought some tangle of circuitry to school, which he said was a clock, but his teachers thought it was a bomb, or might be a bomb, and brought him to the principal's office, and he wound up arrested as a result of this. Now, who knows what happened? This story is only breaking today, but now I'm getting hammered for this being the outcome of my views on profiling. So I should say a few brief things about this. First of all, everything I've said about profiling relates to what I think should happen at airports, which is a unique circumstance. Why are airports unique? Well, because when you're talking about a terrorist getting on a plane, you're talking about someone who is willing to die, right? You're talking about someone who is, by definition, suicidal, if you're talking about bringing down a plane with a bomb or by some other means. So if someone's getting on with his or her kids, you have to then think that this is a person who is willing to sacrifice his kids for this cause. Now, that is a rare breed of person, right? And we should be using all available cues to determine how likely someone is to fit that profile. And as I argue and maintain, smart, well-trained people can, at a glance, exercise very educated intuitions about these things. And not everyone is equally likely to be a jihadist, much less a suicidal one at the airport. But again, I don't think I fall outside of that profile, right? If I'm wandering through the airport alone and I'm not recognized to be the vociferous critic of jihadism that I am, hey, I'm as likely as almost anyone, based on surface appearance, to be the next suicide bomber. But Betty White isn't. And no one who looks like Betty White, frankly, is. And until ISIS and Al-Qaeda successfully recruit people who look like Betty White, I think gradations of suspicion are perfectly appropriate here. But things change when you're talking about schools. Now we're not necessarily talking about suicidal terrorism. We're talking about incidents that more resemble the kinds of things we have learned, unfortunately, to worry about at schools. We're worried about mass shootings, for the most part, of students and teachers by students rather often, and rather often by white students. I think probably most often by white students, judging from the news coverage. I should hope that the teachers and the administration will exercise the same degree of caution whether the child is white or Arab or Muslim or Christian. The background of the person is totally irrelevant. We're talking about the object they brought with them, which has provoked suspicion. Now again, I don't know anything about Ahmed apart from the video that I saw of him online. He looks like a perfectly wonderful kid whose interest in science is to be celebrated. But if he brought something to school that looked terrifying to his teachers and he couldn't give an adequate account of what it was, well then caution was totally warranted, whatever his religious background or color of his skin. And if it looked like a clock, well then not. I've seen some photos that purport to be the thing he brought. It didn't look much like a clock. But in any case, the idea that racism or bigotry or xenophobia was giving some topspin to this episode, that is, if true, to be totally deplored. Right? Again, I don't know the specifics of what happened to Ahmed. It looks on its surface to be reprehensible, but the way in which Glenn Greenwald and the usual suspects are demagoguing this issue and holding it up as an example of Islamophobia or as a straightforward implementation of my views, well, that should come as no surprise. It's totally dishonest, and it's quite damaging to our conversation about very hard issues. How we deal with our security concerns going forward is a very difficult issue. It's difficult politically, it's difficult ethically, it's difficult practically, and it is only made more difficult by this kind of obscurantism.
Okay, and the people at the school thought it might be a bomb, perhaps because it looks exactly like a fucking bomb.